Hello, welcome back to our last week, if you can believe it. This is our very last week of reading BFG. Excuse me, next week is your last week of third grade. I can't believe it. It's crazy that we're already here at the end of the year. So if you remember last week, where we left off, we were talking about the BFG Sophie eating breakfast with the Queen. And then she called in the military to come in and help them to go find the giants and to capture them and to stop them from eating people. So I had started chapter 21 and we had to stop halfway through. Actually, it wasn't halfway. It was like a third of the way through chapter 21 because it's kind of long. So this chapter I'm going to read today. I'm going to finish it tomorrow. And then there's only 2 chapters for Wednesday and Thursday. And then that's it. We're done. So let's go ahead and get started for today. So where I left off last week, I'm just going to reread a couple of the sentences here. It says, could I please bring back here the belly poppers, all my collection of dreams? They is taking me years and years to collect, and I is not wanting to lose them. Why, of course, the Queen said. I wish you a safe journey. The BFG had made thousands of journeys to and from Giant Country over the years, but he had never in his life made one quite like this, with 9 huge helicopters roaring along just over his head. He had never before traveled in broad daylight either. He hadn't dared to. But this was different. Now he was doing it for the Queen of England herself, and he was frightened of nobody. As he galloped across the British Isles with the helicopters thundering above him, people stood and gaped and wondered what on earth was going on. They had never seen the likes of it before, and they never would again. Every now and then, the pilots of the helicopters would catch a glimpse of a small girl wearing glasses crouching in the giant's right ear and waving to them. They always waved back. The pilots marveled at the giant's speed as they waved, at the way he leapt across wide rivers and huge houses. But they hadn't seen anything yet. Be careful to hang on tight, the BFG said. We is going fast as a fizzle grump. The BFG changed into his famous top gear, and all at once he began to fly forward as though there were springs in his legs and rockets in his toes. He went skimming over the earth like some magical hop, skip, and a jumper, with his feet hardly ever touching the ground. As usual, Sophie had to crouch low in the crevice of his ear to save herself from being swept clean away. The 9 pilots in their helicopters suddenly realized they were being left behind. The giant was streaking ahead. They opened their throttles to full speed, and even then, they were only able to keep up. In the leading machine, the head of the Air Force was sitting beside the pilot. He had a world atlas at his knees, and he kept staring first at the atlas, then at the ground below, trying to figure out where they were going. Frantically, he turned the pages of the atlas. Where the devil are we going? He cried. I haven't the foggiest idea, the pilot answered. The Queen's orders were to follow the giant, and that's exactly what I'm doing. The pilot was a young Air Force officer with a bushy mustache. He was very proud of his mustache. He was also quite fearless and loved adventure. He thought this was a super adventure. It's fun going to new places, he said. New places? Shouted the head of the Air Force. What the blazes do you mean, new places? This place we're flying over now isn't on the atlas, is it? The pilot said, grinning. You're darn right it isn't in the atlas, cried the head of the Air Force. We've flown clear off the last page. I expect the old giant knows where he's going, the young pilot said. He's leading us to disaster, cried the head of the Air Force. He was shaking with fear. In the seat behind him sat the head of the army, who was even more terrified. You don't mean to tell me you've gone right off the atlas? He cried, leaning forward to look. That's exactly what I'm telling you, cried the Air Force man. Look for yourself. Here's the very last map in the whole flaming atlas. We went off that over an hour ago. He turned the page. As in all atlases, there were 2 completely blank pages at the very end. So now we must be somewhere here, he said, putting a finger on one of the blank pages. Where's here? Cried the head of the army. The young pilot was still grinning broadly. He said to them, That's why they always put 2 blank pages at the end of the atlas. They're for new countries. We're meant to fill them in ourselves. The head of the Air Force glanced down at the ground below. Just look at this godforsaken desert. I almost said dessert. Whoops. Desert, he cried. All the trees were dead, and all the rocks are blue. The giant has stopped, the young pilot said. He's waving us down. The pilots throttled back the engines, and all 9 helicopters landed safely on the great yellow wasteland. Then each of them lowered a ramp from its belly. 9 jeeps, 1 from each helicopter, were driven down the ramps. Each jeep contained 6 soldiers and a vast quantity of thick rope and heavy chains. I don't see any giants, the head of the army said. The giants is all just out of sight over there, the BFG told him. But if you is taking slosh-buckling noise belly poppers any closer, all the giants is waking up at once, and then pop goes the weasel. So you want us to proceed by jeep, the head of the army said. Yes, the BFG said, but you must all be very busy, or very, very hushy quiet. No roaring of motors, no shouting, no mucking about, no piggery jokery. The BFG, with Sophie still in his ear, trotted forward, and the jeeps followed close behind. Suddenly, the most dreadful rumbling noise was heard by everyone. The head of the army went pea-green in the face. Those are guns, he cried. There is a battle raging somewhere up ahead of us. Turn back, the lot of you. Let's get out of here. Pigs, piffle, the BFG said. Those noises is not guns. Of course they're guns, shouted the head of the army. I'm a military man, and I know a gun when I hear one. Turn back. Those is just the giants snortling in their sleep, the BFG said. I is a giant myself, and I know a giant snortle when I is hearing one. Are you quite sure? The army man said anxiously. Positive, the BFG said. Proceed cautiously, the army man ordered. They all moved on. Then they saw them. Even at a distance, they were enough to scare the daylights out of the soldiers. But when they got close and saw what the giants really looked like, they began to sweat with fear. 9 fearsome, ugly, half-naked, 50 long brutes lay sprawled over the ground in various grotesque attitudes of sleep, and the sound of their snorting was indeed like gunfire in a battle. Sorry, just checking how many pages we have left. The BFG raised a hand. The jeeps all stopped. The soldiers got out. What happens if one of them wakes up? Whispered the head of the army, his knees knocking together from fear. If any one of them is waking up, he will gobble you down before you can say knackjife. Instead of jackknife, knackjife. I think I said that right. The BFG answered, grinning hugely. Me is the only one what won't be gobbled up, because giants is never eating giants. Me and Sophie is the only one safe, because I is hiding her if that happens. The head of the army took several paces to the rear. So did the head of the Air Force. They climbed rather quickly back into their jeep, ready to make a fast getaway if necessary. Go forward, men, the head of the army said. Go forward and do your duty bravely. The soldiers crept forward with their ropes and chains. All of them were trembling mightily. None dared speak of a word. And that is where we're going to stop today. And we will finish tomorrow to see how this plays out. I'll see you then.